So this is your what we call your hip matrix. It's a bit, I sometimes refer to it as a 3D stretch, but I'm trying to sort of avoid the word stretch because really what I'm trying to do is ask you to take your hip through a broader range of movement experiences in order to prepare the joint and all of the muscles that control the joint, predominantly at the front, uh, for what's to come. So we want you to be sort of prepared for activity, nicely warmed up, and well mobilized. We're not holding any one position for so long as to really qualify it as a stretch. We're more visiting an end range of motion and then coming back. So for this exercise, we want to use a step, whatever you can find. It might be just a stair or a front step or a tree stump, whatever you've got to hand at the time. As long as it's not too high. I mean, this little step is pretty ideal. And what we want to do is essentially lunge. You can keep your foot up on the step and you're going through that classic hip flexor stretch sort of lunge. But we want to try and get a little bit more out of that. So we're going to take the arms forwards and up at the same time. That's going to drive you to go into a little bit of spinal extension, so a little bit of back bending, especially through your lumbar spine, but also through your thoracic spine. So now we're starting to find we've really got a lot more extension happening at the hip as well, because we've got the hip to extend with the spine by taking the arms forwards and overhead. So we could say that we are achieving a sagittal plane lunge to access the front of the hip and all of those hip flexors. But when you're out running or walking, anything can happen. Your foot could fall slightly inside of you, slightly outside of you. You could end up pushing off a foot that's slightly internally rotated or slightly externally rotated. So we want to prepare the joint for everything that's possible. So we're going to take the leg slightly wider this time. So you've effectively abducted the leg on the frontal plane. But the movement is still going to be the same. You're still going to be lunging into your step. You might find you're now accessing slightly different fibers, a slightly different kind of a pull. For you, this might be where it's slightly tighter. But we're just going to the barrier of where it pulls tight and then coming back. Nice and gentle. You don't have to push through pain. I don't want you to work into pain because then you'll just be driving compensations. So, again, arms all the way up. Okay, just at a nice even rhythm. Okay. On the same principle, on the frontal plane, we can adduct. So we can come across ourselves, across the midline. So now the left hip here is adducted on the frontal plane, but we're still going to mobilize in the sagittal plane, lunging into our step. Okay, and depending on your individual needs, this might not be such a big deal, or it might be exactly where you need to go. It could be that you can't adduct very much without getting a pinch in the groin. Don't work in a pinched position. Okay. We can also choose to work on the transverse plane, the rotational plane. So I've turned my left hip now outwards into external rotation, but we're still going to mobilize on that sagittal plane. Okay. You can come down each time and sweep up, or you can just work at your barrier, just like that. Likewise, internal rotation. Keep your balance. And again, you can let the heel of the back foot lift a little bit if that's what it wants to do. There's no strict rules here. Your driver is actually your hands. I just want you to be thinking about, I'm taking my hands over my head and you're generating a chain reaction from your hands all the way down to the ground. By the time we're getting to your left foot in this example, just let it do what comes naturally, because this is the unconscious mobilization that we're trying to create. Now, we've worked abducted, adducted, externally rotated, internally rotated. but we can also add in a combination of the two. So for example, you might abduct and you might internally rotate. Anything's possible when you're out running in the hills or even walking down the street. So now we've got two planes of motion that are used up in the left hip, still mobilizing on our sagittal plane. You may find you go a lot less far. But just work with what you've got, work with where you are. You can add in the external rotation in the abducted position and mobilize in the sagittal plane. Okay, by the time you've been through every possible combination of abduction and adduction with internal and external rotation and mobilized everything on that sagittal plane, you will have taken your hip through a lot more than just 6 different potential movements. Because of the way you've used your pelvis and the rest of your body above your hip, you've actually taken your hip through a vast number of different combinations of movement. It takes into consideration the glide of the joint, the roll and the spin of the joint, but the pelvis moving above the hip and the hip moving below the pelvis, everything has been considered. So you've had a very, very comprehensive capsular warm-up of that hip in a very functional position that equates to walking and running and generally gait. Okay, so see how you go with that. Do not work into pain and try not to work so deeply that you pinch things or strain things. You just want to work sensitively up to your barrier and back again, just oscillating on that borderline area where you're starting to feel the engagement of the tissues, but no actual pain.